Good afternoon. My name is Peter Badge. I'm the photographer of almost every living Nobel laureate. And today I'm here together with my friend Luis Ignarro, who wrote this wonderful book, Dr. No, the discovery who leads to Viagra. And it's an amazing life story because it's a role model of the American dream. And I was reading the book and I wish I would be young again because I would be so motivated to go to science. And Lou, we are on a book tour here in Germany, and the young crowd always was listening so wonderful to these wonderful stories. And today we have Lou here to spend an hour with you guys to talk about his book, which is available on Amazon in Asia. And welcome, Lou.
Can you tell us a little about it?
Sure. First, I just want to say that it's great to be here and to be able to communicate and speak to everyone in the Asia-Pacific region. So we're talking about my new book, which was published in the United States back in February of this year. So many people ask me, why did I write this book? What is this book about? And actually, it's a memoir, which means it's sort of like an autobiography. And the reason I wrote the book is that for many years, my friends, my colleagues, especially my research colleagues, who know my story, have suggested and asked me to write a book. And so I took several years to write this book, and I call it Dr. No, because as you'll hear later, the no actually means NO, which is the chemical abbreviation for a very important molecule in the body called nitric oxide. And I'm sure that many of you have heard about nitric oxide. So that's why we call the book Dr. No. And the reason I wrote it is because I have, I think, a very interesting story which I like to share with everyone, especially young people, such as you, students in universities, because it shows how someone can develop from a very young age to a good scientist and eventually be awarded the Nobel Prize. And the unique part about the story is that it's my upbringing. For example, my mother and father were born in Italy. They moved to the United States where they met each other, got married, and then I came along. And during my very young age, my mother and father did not speak English. They spoke only Italian. So this was a big problem for me when I started elementary school, because my English was very poor. And the teachers told my parents that I better learn English very quickly, otherwise I would have problems learning in school. And so that's what I did. I learned English, and although the first 2 years of elementary school were not good for me, my grades were quite poor, eventually I picked up and I did pretty well. And the moral of that story is that despite this handicap of having this language barrier, I was able to overcome that barrier and eventually, over the next few years, climb to the top of my profession in medicine and be awarded the Nobel Prize. And so one does not have to have parents who are doctors, lawyers, engineers, or anything like this in order for you to be successful. You just have to have the passion and the motivation to climb to the top.
So I'm really curious, how did you find out about winning the Nobel Prize?
For many years, my research colleagues would tell me that someday soon I would be awarded the Nobel Prize because of my work. But I never paid attention to them. I did not want to hear that. Because, when you're doing research, when you're at your job, and when you're in science, the last thing you want to hear about is the Nobel Prize. Winning the Nobel Prize should never be a motivation to succeed. If you plan your career thinking, oh, I have to do a good job because I want to get the Nobel Prize, if you think that way, you will never get the Nobel Prize. You can never plan that way. Just do your work, do it the best way you can, and if it's good enough, you should get a Nobel Prize. So how did I learn about this Nobel Prize? First of all, when the Nobel Committee decides who gets the Nobel Prize, the first thing they do before they communicate this information to the news media is to call the recipients of the prize. First, they speak to them on the telephone to congratulate them and tell them that they were awarded the Nobel Prize. And then they call the news media into the room to disseminate that information to the public. Well, they tried to call me, but they could not reach me by phone because I had moved from one city to another city and they did not have the new telephone number. At the time, I was in Europe. I was in France and I was in Italy during that time when the Nobel Prize was announced. And so, because they couldn't wait, they couldn't reach me, so they had to release the news anyway. And so I first learned about the prize when I was in France. I was at an airport waiting to board the plane to go to Italy. I had just finished going to a meeting, a scientific meeting in the south of France. And so I was ready to board the plane when one of the airport attendants made an announcement to ask if there was a Professor Ignarro online on the queue to go into the plane. And I said, yes, over here, I'm Professor Ignarro. And she gave me her cell phone, her mobile phone, and said to me, you have a message, important message from the United States, but here, we only have 1 minute, then we have to board the plane. And so I took her cell phone, and it was one of my friends in Los Angeles who proceeded to ask me how the weather was, how I was feeling, and so on. And I didn't quite understand why he would try to reach me at the airport to ask me those questions. And finally, he asked me if I heard the news. And I said, what news? No, I did not hear the news. So he congratulated me and told me that the announcement was just made that I'd been awarded the Nobel Prize. But just before I could continue speaking, the airport attendant grabbed the phone and told me to get on the plane because we had to depart. So I'm on the plane, and it was about a 45-minute flight to Naples, Italy, and I did not, I was not sure if I really was awarded the Nobel Prize because the conversation was too short, and many times this person I was speaking to likes to joke with me to tell me I'm going to get the Nobel Prize. So I had to wait until the plane landed in Naples, Italy. And when it landed, as the plane moved up toward the terminal, I could see hundreds of people through the window. And they were all taking pictures with the flash light going off. And then I realized, well, maybe there's some truth to this. And then when I got off the plane and I walked down the steps, my friend who invited me to Italy to speak asked me if I heard the news yet. And I said, no, I didn't hear any news. What news? And he showed me a piece of paper, which was the press release from Stockholm, where the Nobel Prizes are announced. And I could read it and I can see it said Nobel Prize in Swedish. And I see my name on the bottom, And I got so excited. So that was the first time that I heard about the Nobel Prize, and believe me, it was a really great moment for me.
So at the start of this interview, you mentioned a little about your academic journey as a kid. Can you tell us if there are any specific incidents that could have sparked your interest in chemistry?
I was always interested in science when I was very young. Starting at 8 or 9 or 10 years old, I always had an interest in what we call today chemistry or physics or biology, and especially chemistry, because I was always fascinated when I was a young child with fireworks, you know, firecrackers, rockets, making all these beautiful colors and flares. And so as a young child, I wanted to try to see if I could make some of these firecrackers and rockets myself. But of course, it's very difficult to do that. To do that, you need at least a chemistry set. And you know, I was 10 years old at this time. My parents did not want to take the chance and buy me a chemistry set, so I had to convince them, yes, please buy me a chemistry set so I can learn some chemistry. But my mother would always say, yeah, but you're only 10 years old. What are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to read the booklet, the instruction book, and do some experiments so I can learn some chemistry. So they agreed to buy me a chemistry set. However, my real intention was not to do the experiments in the booklet. My intention was to make firecrackers, and perhaps very large firecrackers. And that's what I did. I was fairly destructive when I was a young child because I learned to make gunpowder, you know, from my reading. And there were some chemicals in the chemistry set that I needed. Plus, I asked some of my friends who had older brothers to go to the pharmacy to buy me some other chemicals that I needed. So I was able to make some firecrackers, and they were quite powerful. And in fact, they were fairly destructive. So I did some explosions at home, which really upset my mother very, very much. My father too, but he was always more forgiving. And so really, this is how I got interested in science. I was able to do things myself and make them work, such as making firecrackers. Many people call them small bombs, not just firecrackers. I was working with my father, and we made a rocket that we sent up into the air, which did not go straight, but instead went on an angle and went into my neighbor's home right through the window. Broke the window, but my father fixed the window, and my mother once again was ready to throw me out of the house. She was very, very upset. Well, you know, I maintained this interest in chemistry forever. I mean, this is what I liked. I studied it in school. I was also interested in biology. And so I put these two together and went to college to learn more biology and chemistry. And this really helped me in doing my research in the laboratory, of course, when I finished college.
You sounded like a really mischievous kid, but I'm sure your parents are proud of you.
I was quite mischievous, yes. My mother was always scolding me. She was very upset because she was afraid that I might hurt myself and hurt other people. My father was much more forgiving because my parents never went to school. So they did not have any formal education. And my father could see that I was doing things that he did not understand, and he thought it was important that I keep doing these things to learn more. My mother was only concerned that I would kill myself.
Okay, so can we hear about the story where Elton John asked you about Viagra and even asked you for your autograph?
Getting the Nobel Prize really changed my life completely. I had the opportunity to travel to many places. I received many invitations to meet other scientists, to meet other Nobel Prize winners, and even to meet many celebrities. And so one day when I went to Atlanta, Georgia in the United States, I went to a big convention, and the people who hosted the convention invited Elton John to perform. So he gave a very nice 1 hour, maybe even longer performance. And I really liked Elton John. I liked all of his music, including the first one to become popular in the US. It was called Crocodile Rock. But then there were many spectacular songs after that. So I went to this concert, and I was asked if I would like to meet Elton John backstage before his performance. And I jumped at the opportunity. I said, yes, of course. So they took me backstage to meet Elton John, and he was dressed in very colorful clothes with big yellow glasses, I remember. And so we started to talk, and he asked me what I do. I told him, scientist, and then I told him I was awarded the Nobel Prize in medicine. He was very excited about that. And so he asked me about my work. And I told him that my work made possible the development and marketing of Viagra. And his eyes lit up. He was very excited about that. And we were talking about Viagra. And then he asked me, he knew that Viagra is used by men who have erectile dysfunction. And it's very difficult for them to perform sexually. And that's why they take Viagra, because Viagra helps them. So Elton John asked me if Viagra also works in normal men. In other words, does it improve their sexual performance? And I said, yes, of course, Viagra works in normal men. And he said, well, good, Professor, I'm going to start taking it. And then, so as we were talking more and more about my work and about Viagra, it was time to go because he had to go on stage to perform his concert. But before we left, I went to shake his hand, and he said, well, Professor, wait a minute. And he took one of his books, you know, with a blank paper, and he asked me for my autograph. So he actually asked me if I could sign something for his autograph. Of course, he also gave me his autograph, so we exchanged autographs. And I thought that was fascinating for a person like Elton John to ask me for an autograph.
That's a really interesting story.
Oh, it was great.
Yeah. So, as the course director at UCLA Pharma, do you have anything that you can advise students to focus on in school?
Oh, I always have lots of advice. I was a professor, a teacher for many years at UCLA Medical School and other schools even before UCLA. So my work is not just research to make discoveries, but it's also about teaching students. So I taught many medical students and I've always had advice for these students to work hard, to pay attention to the courses that they take. I was always a believer that the more formal courses you take, the better, because it builds up your knowledge base. You know, if you just take the courses that the school recommends, well, that's good, but and never give up. And that's what I've always done. Sometimes it's difficult. You do experiments in the laboratory, and they may not work. Okay, fine, but you should not get depressed over that. You try to figure out why they did not work, and then do other experiments until they work. So you want to try to stay motivated in order to achieve success.
I think this can also be applied to students that have graduated as well, right?
I think that, as I said, I think it's very important that students are well prepared so that when they get out into the real world, they don't have any surprises. Because it's very difficult. Once you get out of school, you're on your own. And when you're on your own, that means you have to do things yourself. And it may be difficult to get help from other places. And what I always tell my students is, don't be shy. If you need help, always go and ask people to help you, because you cannot know everything yourself. I did not know everything myself. So if I needed information, I go to some expert and ask for help. Or I go somewhere else to ask for help. You have to be willing to do that, because if you think you're smart enough, you do everything yourself, you will never progress. Unless you're an absolute genius, which I am not.
Yeah, personally, I also thought that, asking questions was one of the best advice that I've ever gotten.
Yes,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So maybe to end off, can we just know where your nickname, the Father of Viagra, came from?
I've had the name Father of Viagra for quite a few years. Let me explain. I did not develop Viagra. I do not have a patent for Viagra. That came from pharmaceutical company. The name of the company is Pfizer Pharmaceuticals. But my basic research led Pfizer to develop Viagra. In my work, we showed that the neurotransmitter or signaling molecules that are released from the nerves that cause erectile function was nitric oxide. Before we showed that, nobody knew what caused erections, and we did not understand why so many millions of men suffered from erectile dysfunction. If you do not know the physiology of how the organ works, then you cannot understand what the disease may be that causes a problem. So after we discovered that the neurotransmitter that causes erections was nitric oxide, the people at Pfizer read my work, and they quickly made a drug. They developed many drugs, and then they found one that was safe, and they developed it. It was approved by the government, and it was marketed in 1998 as Viagra. And so they were very pleased with my work because my work led them to have Viagra. So they invited me to the laboratory in England. That's where they developed the drug. And they showed me the laboratory where they developed the drug. And when I was there, they said they're going to start calling me the father of Viagra because I made Viagra possible. And from that point on, all the scientists, everyone in the world, started to call me the father of Viagra. And I have to say that I thought that was quite humorous, and many of my friends enjoyed hearing the father of Viagra, but my mother was always very upset. She was alive at the time and doing very well, and whenever she heard that I was introduced as the father of Viagra, she used to get very upset. She told me to please tell them to stop doing that.
Okay, so I think we can wrap this session up, and we'll be moving on to Q&A. Let's wait for the questions to pour in. Okay, so maybe for the first.
Well, when the people at Pfizer invited me to the laboratory to show me where they developed the drug, one of the questions I asked them is, how did the marketing department come up with the name Viagra. You see, the chemical name for the drug is sildenafil. Maybe some of you know that, but to make a drug popular, you have to give it a good name. So that's a trade name. And the Pfizer marketing team used the word Viagra, and they explained to waterfalls, which means it's a very forceful waterfall. So they put vigor and force together and Niagara Falls together, and they came up with Viagra, which I thought was the perfect name.
I see. Maybe another question would be, how do you overcome difficulties during your research?
It's sometimes research can be very difficult, and you must not allow it to frustrate you. As I always tell my people and myself doing research, if you really believe in something, you need to go for it and never give up. Just do what you have to do to achieve success. I also tell people that you need to think outside the box. What that means is that, don't do research that other people are doing just to make it better. I mean, you'll be able to keep your job that way, especially if you work in a university. You'll be able to get publications, but it's, in my opinion, not very exciting. What you should do is something new. Try to do something that nobody else has done. Try to go in a direction that nobody has done before. There's a very famous quote by a writer. His name is Ralph Waldo Emerson, and I always use that. What he said is, do not go where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path and create a trail. And that's what I always try to tell my students.
A student also asked if there are any other notable things that resulted from your research.
Yes, Viagra was not the only notable result from my research. That's just one of them. Let me explain very briefly why I was awarded the Nobel Prize. We have this molecule called nitric oxide. Very simple molecule. One atom of nitrogen attached to one atom of oxygen, NO, nitric oxide. Nitric oxide was well known for 200 years to be a gas present in the atmosphere, a polluting gas in the atmosphere. So nobody was thinking that nitric oxide could possibly be important in the body. But I had other ideas because I was thinking outside the box. We were studying the pharmacology of nitric oxide for other reasons. We found that it lowered the blood pressure, that it prevented blood from clotting, it improved blood flow, and so I had the idea, well, maybe, just maybe, our bodies actually produce nitric oxide. Well, everybody said I was crazy. It was difficult for me to get research money to do these experiments because they thought I was crazy. But I really insisted that our bodies must produce nitric oxide because of these unique effects of this molecule. So we finally did the experiments, and yes, we showed and proved that our arteries and other parts of the body produce nitric oxide, and the purpose of the nitric oxide is to prevent high blood pressure, to prevent stroke, and to prevent heart attack. And because of that, the Nobel Foundation decided to award me the Nobel Prize.
So currently there are a lot of students that are trying to find their way to find a job that they like in the future. So do you have any advice for these people to find what they like to do?
Well, I think that whatever you enjoy doing, that's what you need to do for a career. It doesn't make any difference whether it's engineering, law, politics, science, physician. I can really talk only about science because I'm a scientist. I could have been a physician because I went to medical school and graduate school, but for me, practicing medicine was not something I enjoyed. Many people love practicing medicine because they can treat people, they can help sick people, they can save lives, and that's an honorable profession. But I did not like the sight of human blood or broken bones. I couldn't do that. I'd rather work in a laboratory where I could be more useful and make discoveries to help people indirectly. So my advice would be, whatever you decide to do, especially if it's science, think carefully what you want to do as a scientist. Pick your university very carefully. Make sure that in the university they're doing the kind of research that you are interested in. Don't just go to any university. Go, and you don't necessarily have to go to the best university. Go where you like what kind of research they're doing, so you could do that research, because ultimately it's up to you to be successful in doing research. So make it as easy as possible for yourself. And then once you start really doing a good job in your research, if you want, you could always change where you work. Just go to a different university, or perhaps go into pharmaceutical industry. That's also possible.
So actually there were two students that asked if, like after you received your Nobel Prize, how did it actually affect, getting grants for your research? Or, is there any impact because of your Nobel Prize in your research?
Well, the Nobel Prize changed my life completely, 100%, in so many different ways. One way is, I'm here talking to you. So if I didn't have the Nobel Prize, I'm sure I would not be here talking to you. But in science, of course, it's incredibly beneficial, because with the Nobel Prize, whenever I wrote a research grant, even if it was not so good, I would get the funds for my laboratory. After the Nobel Prize, I had hundreds and hundreds of applications from students who wanted to work in my laboratory. So I could review all the applications and pick the 3 or 4 absolutely best students to come to my lab. Same thing with postdoctoral fellows. So life can be very good after the Nobel Prize. The Nobel Prize opens up many opportunities to improve your research. The university, of course, really likes when their faculty get a Nobel Prize. I'm the only person at UCLA Medical School who ever got a Nobel Prize in medicine. Only one. And so, what did they do after the prize? They built me a huge laboratory. They built me a big office with a nice view. It was all very nice.
Other than meeting Elton John and other celebrities, has a student would like to know if, has being a Nobel laureate resulted in any other surprising or unexpected experiences?
Oh yes, many job opportunities. I was asked to be director of the biggest government organization that funds all of the research in the United States. It's called the National Institutes of Health, NIH. That was an incredible offer, which I turned down because I didn't want a desk job. I love my research. I wanted to continue research. I was asked to be director of the Food and Drug Administration in the US, which is the most powerful government body that regulates drugs. But again, it was a great honor to get asked to do that, but I turned it down. So, but other jobs I accepted. For example, the Lancôme division of L'Oreal, they make cosmetics. they asked me if I would be a consultant for 5 years. And so I asked them, well, what do you want me to do? And they said, well, we want you to help us make better creams, you know, for the skin and so on. And I said, but you know, I don't know much about cosmetics. And they said, oh, you'll learn. It would be a good thing. They wanted a Nobel laureate to be associated with the company. And I accepted the invitation. Why? Because they sent me to Paris, France, 3 times a year for 5 years. That's why I accepted it.
That must be really fun, actually. A really
It's
job,
fun.
right?
And there were so many opportunities like that. And actually, there were so many invitations like that, it interfered a little bit with my own research. But that was fine, because this was something new I had never done before, and I wanted these new experiences.
I see, I see. Another question from a student was, what do you think of the dilemma between chasing your dreams and actually like having a realistic job, you know, something that pays well? Yeah.
Well, sure. If you go into science, again, I can only talk about science because I don't know anything else. When you first start off in science, the pay is not very good. Even if you're a doctor, physician, these days is different from years ago, and you don't make too much money. And at least in the United States, you have to borrow money from the bank in order to pay for your education. So then when you start working, you have to pay back where you got the money. And getting an education in college can be very expensive. So it can be very frustrating. That's why so many students decide they don't want to go into science, they do not want to be doctors, they would rather just go into business and open up a business and try to make money that way. My opinion is that money is not important until later in life. At the beginning, you should never think about the money. You should think about what you want to do best. If I thought about money when I was young, I wouldn't be a scientist, I wouldn't be a Nobel laureate. I might have money, but why is that important? As long as you have enough to eat, buy your clothes, and live a decent life, that's okay when you're younger. That's what I did. I mean, I did not have any money until years later. In fact, I really started to get my money after I got married because my wife was working also. And then, of course, the Nobel Prize helps. And as I said before, it opened up many opportunities. And admittedly, now I have lots of money. But I donate a lot of my money. I give it away to other people, other organizations who need it more than I do. First I bought my Porsche, and then I started giving the money away.
So I guess we should always chase our dreams?
Oh yes, absolutely. Sorry, I lost track. Of course you should chase your dreams. I chased my dreams. I wanted to go into science. I love science, and that's all I wanted to do. Nothing else. Nothing else interested me. So I chased those dreams. I worked very hard, and because I chased those dreams, I became successful. So that's what everyone should do.
I guess other than successful, you'll also be very happy doing your job, right?
Yes, always. I think that if you chase your success and it works, then you're very happy doing your job. I loved my job. I went into my lab every morning at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning, not because I had to do it, no, because I wanted to do it. And that's what makes life and your job very exciting.
And I think that's the difference between, when you're happy in your job versus when you don't want to go to your job.
Right. And I mean, if you wake up in the morning and you dread going to work, that's not a good thing. If you can, you should try to change your job to something that makes you look forward to going to work. Then you could be more successful.
I see. So the next question maybe would be, somebody was asking what your inspirations are, both in the industry and also maybe in your day-to-day life outside.
Well, again, my inspirations were always to try to do the best job I could in science and in helping humankind. Many scientists like to do what we call esoteric research. In other words, they want to make discoveries that really don't have much of a benefit to humankind. And I did some of that because my mind was very curious, but it was a good thing that I went to medical school and graduate school, because in medical school I really learned that what I wanted to do is help people. I just did not want to diagnose and treat people. I wanted to do other things, make discoveries, new drugs, for example, that would help people in the long run. And so that was what was inspiring, about my work.
I guess this is quite similar to the advice that you tell students, right? To take as many formal courses as you can.
Yes, I'm a big believer in formal courses. I've had many students, my own students, who would tell me, Professor, why do I have to take this course? This course is not required by the university. Why do you want me to take this course? And I said, well, if you want to work in my laboratory, I'm telling you, you must take this course. Even if the university says you don't have to, if you want to work here, you take the course. And they would take the course. And later, years later, they would thank me for making them take the course. As I said before, the more information you have in your brain, the easier it will be to raise important questions and answer important questions in your research. If you are narrow-minded, how are you going to be creative in your research? Many of the students, they just want to take a few courses and then they want to graduate and go do their work. Well, it turns out when they start doing their work, they can't do it because not enough information. So listen to me now. Take as many courses as you can, even if it's not required.
Yeah, actually, personally, I find that the questions that I ask are always the best after I've done my research.
Yeah, see that?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
not like
yeah.
those empty questions that you ask your professor just for the sake of asking.
Exactly.
Yeah. So another question maybe would be, what actually? Sorry. This was actually asked already. Somebody asked, how much sleep do you actually have every day, and how does your sleep quality affect your work?
That's a very good question. Sleep is very important. I tell people I get up 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning to go into the laboratory. Now I'm retired. I do not go into the laboratory, but I still get up 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the morning because I have 2 big dogs, and my wife and I like to feed and walk the dogs very early in the morning, and then we do lots of exercise. Okay, so how does sleep affect your performance? Well, we get up 4 or 5 in the morning, but when do we go to sleep? We go to sleep at 8 o'clock at night. We do not party very much, maybe on a Saturday or a Sunday sometimes, but we go to bed very early because personally I need 7 or 8 hours sleep. And that's about average, and that's healthy. You don't want to get 6 hours of sleep all the time. If you're younger, you can get by with 6 hours of sleep. But as you get older, your body tells you you have to get more sleep. And getting 7 or 8 hours is very healthy for your physiology. You don't need more than that. I have friends who get 9 hours sleep, 10 hours sleep. If I get 9 or 10 hours sleep, I'm groggy for the rest of the day. I cannot function. So I have to get 7 or 8.
Now students, we are always getting like 3 to 4 hours of sleep every day. Studying, doing projects.
It's difficult. when I was going to school, I had, when I went away to college, I had roommates, right? I mean, you don't have your own apartment, at least not back then. Three of us or four guys would be together, you know, in a 2-bedroom apartment. And they would always study until 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, go to sleep for 3 hours, 4 hours, and wake up. I never did that. I would go to sleep at 8 or 9 o'clock, but I would get up when they went to sleep. I got up at 3 or 4 in the morning because that was my best time. My brain worked best early in the morning with coffee. And that's when I did all my studying while they were sleeping. But so I still, even in school, I got my 7-hour sleep. I had to. My body needed that.
You sound like a morning person.
Yeah, I'm a very morning person.
Okay, so a student is also asking, I'll just read it off.
Sure.
As an aspiring researcher, he would like to ask how important networking is. You know, for example, in exchange programs, seminars, mixing with people from other countries. Yeah.
These exchange programs are quite important. When I was growing up and doing my research, none of this existed. You know, remember, you guys out there are a lot younger than I am. When I was in school, there was no typewriter, there was no calculator. Nobody ever heard of a computer. What's a computer? No photocopying. Cell phone? What is a cell phone? Nothing existed. All of those things occurred later in my career. And for example, a cell phone. You know when that came out? When I got my Nobel Prize in 1998. Before that, there were no cell phones. I mean, it started a little bit earlier and they were about this big. And you had to carry it on your shoulder. Now, of course, they're very, very small. And so today I see that a lot of kids are networking, not kids, adults too. Networking is very important because it gives you the opportunity to communicate with people all over the world. It's great to understand and see the cultures of different people in different countries. And I didn't really get to see that until after my Nobel Prize, because that's when all of this internet and so on developed. And I took advantage of that, of course. It was brand new, and in my travels I could see this, and so I would agree. I think that networking is very important for young people, for anybody, to open up their minds to see what is happening globally. People have to work together to improve the entire planet, not just where they live.
You know, personally, I'm not a researcher. I'm actually in the business. So networking for us is really, really important.
Yes.
Yeah, especially to get jobs in the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Very, very important.
And I've had, you know, when I speak to directors or, you know, bosses in big companies, I always find that their words are very inspiring.
Yes, and that's how you would find out, by networking
precisely.
and talking to other people.
Yeah.
It could be very inspiring.
Another student is asking, you know, before the prize, did you ever question yourself and wanted to quit? And so what actually kept you on track until now?
There were many times when I thought about quitting because the research was not working out, the experiments were not working out, but I realized that there must be a reason why experiments are not working. So I would try to look for a different approach to doing these experiments, to try to understand why certain experiments don't work and why they work. And actually, you know, many students get very frustrated when an experiment that they have in mind does not work. But really what you need to do is understand that the reason the experiment is not working is because your idea is not correct. So you use that information to try to get back on track. You know, to try to find out what is truthful and what is not. And so that's why I always tell students that you must never give up. don't get frustrated, just don't give up. And what we say in America is that it takes a very thick skin to do research, a very thick skin. And you just have to bear with it and do the best you can, and eventually you will become successful.
I see. Okay, so actually I accidentally skipped the question. I'm really sorry about that. So a student asked, what advice would you give if a student is planning to continue studying science after graduation?
Well, I mean, the advice I would give students to continue doing research after graduation, well, I'm assuming that they're trained in science and they've graduated and now they want to do research. There are many different opportunities to do research, and you have to decide what you want to do. You can go into academics, a university, and do research and also teaching. You can go into a big pharmaceutical company to work for them to develop drugs. You could go into a biotech company, which involves both research and development of a drug, or even if you want to do something you love, think about it. You know, you may like something, but maybe it's not going to take you anywhere. You know, you may like something, but think ahead where that is going to take you. And I think if you do both, you could be even more successful.
Maybe the last few questions you'll be asking. What were your turning points in your career?
Well, I've had several turning points. I guess my first turning point in my career when I was young, and I did not kill myself with all the explosives that I was developing. That was a good turning point. My mother actually became my friend when I stopped doing these explosives. Another turning point in my career was when I was in high school. When I was in high school, again, as you heard before, I liked chemistry. And in my high school, way back when, we had a biology department, we had physics, but we did not have chemistry. So I went up to my teacher and I said, why don't we have a chemistry laboratory? You know, I wanted to work in a chemistry laboratory in high school. And he said, well, we just don't have one in this school. So anyway, he invited someone to come to the school for a few days to help establish a chemistry laboratory. And this person he invited had been awarded the Nobel Prize in chemistry 2 years before that. And his name was Professor Linus Pauling, one of the most famous chemists that ever lived. And I knew about him because I was reading a lot of chemistry. So I was so excited. And then he came, and my teacher explained to Professor Pauling that I was very interested in chemistry and that I wanted to go into chemistry in college. So Professor Pauling paid a lot of attention to me, and we talked for 2 days. And he was a spectacular teacher. He could explain very complicated chemistry in a very simple way so that the students could understand it. And he was the most important factor in my life that convinced me that I have to go into science so I could be like him someday. So that was an extremely important turning point.
You know, this actually sounds like one of the most important reasons to why we should be networking, right?
Of course.
You know, mentorship and everything.
Yes,
That's very important.
today it's very easy because you can network and you could try to communicate with important people to get some ideas and so on. You can make arrangements to even meet them. We didn't have any of this back then. I was lucky. My teacher knew Linus Pauling and invited him to come to the school. But the reason he invited Pauling to come to the school is because I kept telling the teacher and the principal of the school that we should have a chemistry laboratory in high school. Not just a physics laboratory, but chemistry. So they did that, and it worked out very nicely.
Actually, you know, to follow up with this, right, do you have any advice on how to maybe start off networking? You know, because I think even for me, it was quite difficult to start off. Like, I didn't know who to approach or how to approach people.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I have never done networking. Remember, networking is for people your age. It's very recent. So I don't really have much advice. I think that, if I were to do that now, you just have to try to identify certain people, certain organizations that are of interest to you, and then communicate with them somehow, right? And networking, and then go from there. But other than that, it's hard for me to give advice because I have never done it. It was not popular. It did not exist when I was doing my work.
I see. Okay, one question is also, how is science education or research different from between now and in the past? Is it like better now? And how would you actually improve it, you know, as a professor?
Science education, doing science is much easier now than before. And the reason for that is many. Number one, we know much more today than we did years ago. When I was doing research, much less information was available. So we actually had to discover and find out this information because it didn't exist. If you wanted to do experiments in a laboratory, many times you could not buy certain chemicals or certain reagents because they did not exist. When I worked in a laboratory, we had to make our own chemicals to do experiments with. Not today. Today, you order the chemicals from all the chemical houses and you have it. That saves you a long time. That saves you many, many days, weeks, or months because you don't have to make these things. Also, there's so many ideas out there now, so it's quite easy, I think, to bounce from one idea to the next. There's so much, there's been an information explosion in the last 20, 25 years in science. And so that, I think, makes it much easier to do your experiments. Maybe the more difficult aspect today is that it's harder to discover something than in the rest of the body. The brain is loaded with nitric oxide. Why? What does nitric oxide do in the brain? We don't know. Okay? Go find out and get a Nobel Prize yourself. That's just one answer.
Okay, last question. Somebody's asking, you know, is there anything in common with, you know, all the Nobel Prize winners? Do you know if there's anything? There are lots of things that we have in common. Perhaps the most important thing we have in common is our passion and motivation to ask and answer important questions. I asked, what causes high blood pressure? What causes a heart attack? What causes a stroke? Those were my questions, and I was sure to just keep working to answer those questions. And that's what these other people do. I actually remember back in school, when I first started learning science, that was how they taught us as well, you know, to ask leading questions, and then we'll do our experiments after that.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, I guess this is the end of the live session. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope that you've learned something from this session. I remember to check out Lewis's book. Yeah. Do you want to?
Dr. No, yes.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts?
Well, I think this has been great to talk to all of you, and I want to wish all of you the greatest success in your lives. And actually, what I think could help is this book that I wrote. I wrote this book for you, for all the young people who are starting off in any profession. It doesn't have to be science, because what this book shows is how someone got motivated at a very, very young age and had a roller coaster ride all the way through until success with the Nobel Prize. So I think it's a good read for anyone who is now starting their career. Thank you.